$5 a day, one coffee most weekdays, sometimes weekends too. It doesn't feel like a financial decision when you're making it, it feels like a small, forgettable treat. Here's what that $5 actually becomes if it goes into an index fund instead of a cup, with real math, not a rounded-up internet meme. The actual math done honestly. $5 a day, 7 days a week is $35 a week, or roughly $151 a month, or $1,825 a year. Invested consistently in a broad market index fund earning the S&P 500's long-term historical average of roughly 10% annually before inflation, about 7% after adjusting for inflation. Here's what 10 years actually produces. At a 10% nominal annual return, contributing $151 a month for 10 years results in approximately $29,500. At a 7% real, inflation-adjusted, return, the same contributions produce approximately $26,000 in today's purchasing power. The gap between these two numbers is the difference between raw future dollars and what those dollars will actually buy you, a distinction almost every viral version of this math conveniently skips. Why the number feels both impressive and unremarkable at the same time. $26,000 to $29,500 from what feels like pocket change is genuinely significant, money that didn't exist otherwise, produced from a purchase small enough to not register as a real financial decision. It's also honestly not skip coffee and become a millionaire territory, despite how this concept sometimes gets marketed. 10 years of consistent small contributions builds a meaningful sum, not a fortune. The real value of this exercise isn't the specific dollar amount. It's what the exercise reveals about how small, invisible daily decisions compound into large, visible outcomes over a decade, a lesson that applies to far more than coffee. What changes if you only cut back instead of eliminating it entirely? Realistically, most people aren't going to quit coffee completely, and this math doesn't require that. If you simply make coffee at home 3 days a week instead of 5, saving roughly $15 a week instead of $35, invested at the same 10% nominal return, 10 years produces approximately $12,600. Less dramatic, considerably more realistic for most people's actual habits, and still a meaningful sum built from a genuinely minor lifestyle adjustment. The part of this math that actually matters more than the coffee. This exercise isn't really about coffee. It's about the mechanism. Any small recurring expense, $5 a day, $20 a week, $80 a month, run through the same compounding math over the same 10-year window produces a comparable result. The specific expense is interchangeable. The mechanism, consistent small amounts invested over time, is the actual lesson. This is why financial writers have used this exact framing for decades, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with cigarettes, sometimes with a specific subscription. The vehicle changes, the math underneath stays identical. If you have a genuinely different small recurring expense you'd rather examine, the same calculation applies directly. Why 10 years specifically produces a number that feels almost unbelievable, and 30 years produces one that actually is. The same $151 a month, extended to 30 years instead of 10, at the same 10% nominal return, produces approximately $342,000. This isn't a typo or an exaggeration, it's the specific, well-documented mechanism of compound growth, where the majority of total growth happens in the final third of any long investment timeline, not evenly distributed across the whole period. 10 years shows you the beginning of the curve, where the numbers are meaningful but still modest. 30 years shows you where the curve actually goes once enough time has passed for the compounding to genuinely take over, which is also exactly why most people underestimate what small, consistent habits produce over an entire working lifetime rather than just a decade. The honest caveats nobody includes in the viral version of this claim. First, 10% is a long-term historical average, not a guaranteed annual return. Some years the market returns 25%, some years it loses 20%, and the average only emerges over long stretches of time. A specific 10-year period could reasonably produce a meaningfully higher or lower result than these projections, depending on which decade you happen to be invested through. Second, this math assumes the money is actually invested consistently, automatically every single month, without skipping contributions or selling during a downturn. The behavioral discipline required is arguably harder than the math itself, and it's the actual variable that determines whether anyone reaches these numbers in real life. Third, this exercise works best as a demonstration of the mechanism, not a literal financial plan. Nobody should feel obligated to eliminate every small pleasure in their life chasing a specific projected number. The point is understanding that small, consistent investing compounds meaningfully, not that coffee itself is a financial mistake. Why this framing still matters, despite the caveats. Even accounting for all of the above, the core insight holds. Money that feels too small to matter, redirected consistently into an investment account instead of spent on something forgettable, produces a real substantial sum over a decade, not through any special skill or timing but simply through consistency and time, the same two ingredients behind every long-term investing outcome, regardless of the specific number attached. The $5 Starbucks example works as a teaching tool precisely because it's relatable and small enough to not feel threatening to actually try. Nobody needs to feel judged by a daily coffee habit. The exercise is meant to illustrate a mechanism you can then apply to whatever specific small expense actually exists in your own life, at whatever amount is realistic for you. What to actually do with this information? If this math resonates, the actionable version isn't never buy coffee again. It's identifying one small, recurring expense in your own life you could redirect a portion of, setting up an automatic transfer for that specific amount into a low-cost index fund, and letting the same mechanism run in the background for years, the same way it would with coffee money specifically. The amount doesn't need to be $5 a day. It could be $2 or $10 or whatever genuinely fits your own budget without feeling like deprivation. The math scales linearly and the actual lesson transfers regardless of the specific number you start with. This is general financial education based on historical market averages, not a guarantee of future returns. The S&P 500's historical performance does not predict future results, and actual outcomes depend on market conditions during your specific investment period, fees, and consistency of contributions. This is not personalized financial advice. Consider consulting a fee-only fiduciary financial advisor for guidance tailored to your specific situation. Somewhere right now, someone is buying a $5 coffee without thinking twice about it, the same way they have almost every day for years. The coffee itself was never the actual point. The redirected version of that same $5 moving automatically into an index fund instead is sitting there right now as a choice, waiting to become 10 years from now, a number that started this small and stopped feeling small a long time before the decade actually ended.